The investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie has hit day 52, and the air in Pima County is thick with a mixture of grief, frustration, and a growing sense of outrage. For 7 weeks, the public has watched as a beloved mother and community pillar seemingly vanished into the ether, leaving behind only a trail of questions and a handful of haunting blood droplets. But today, the narrative is shifting. We aren't just looking at a stalled case anymore. We are looking at a department under fire and new forensic insights that challenge everything we thought we knew about those final moments inside Nancy's home. From explosive testimony at a Board of Supervisors meeting to a professional deep dive into the physics of blood spatter, the walls are closing in on the official story. I'm Febri, and this is the Febri Report. If you want to stay on top of this case as the truth finally starts to leak out, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We are digging deep into the evidence that the authorities might have overlooked or ignored. To understand where we are on day 52, we have to go back to the very beginning, to the quiet early morning hours of February 1st. For weeks, the timeline has been the bedrock of this investigation. We know Nancy Guthrie arrived home, pulled her car into the garage, and lowered the door. To any observer, it was the end of a normal Saturday night. But somewhere between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m., the sanctuary of her home was violated. Sheriff Nanos has long maintained a theory that Nancy was taken from her bed, a detail echoed by her daughter Savannah, who described her mother being snatched in the dark of night. It's a terrifying image. An elderly woman, vulnerable and asleep, suddenly confronted by a filthy scumbag, as many are now calling the perpetrator, who had infiltrated her private space. But the big question that has haunted every armchair detective and professional investigator alike is, what exactly happened behind those closed doors? Was there a struggle in the bedroom? Did she fight back in the kitchen? For a long time, the interior of the house was a black box. We knew there was blood, but we didn't know the where or the how. My sources confirmed early on, as early as day 3, red stains were found inside the home, but the specifics were kept under lock and key. Now, new information is surfacing that paints a much more vivid and much more clinical picture of those moments. The initial deputies who arrived on the scene weren't homicide detectives. They were responding to a welfare check for an elderly woman who hadn't shown up for church. It was only when they saw the state of the house that the skilled investigators were called in. They found the back door wide open, not just unlocked, wide open. This is a critical distinction because Nancy's children have stated she routinely left her back doors unlocked. But leaving one standing open to the night air is a different story entirely. However, the most significant piece of data I've recently uncovered isn't about the back door, it's about the front entrance. Through multiple sources, I have learned that the blood evidence, the very same dripping pattern seen on the walkway, actually begins inside the house, right in the front hallway. If you were to stand in Nancy's foyer and look toward the living room on your left or the family room straight ahead, you would be standing right on top of the origin point. This changes the entire geometry of the crime. It suggests that whatever injury Nancy sustained, she was either standing or being held in that specific spot for a not insignificant amount of time. It wasn't a quick dash out the door. It was a lingering, agonizingly slow exit that left a vertical trail of breadcrumbs leading right out to the driveway. When you look at the layout of Nancy's home, the front entrance is a central hub. From that vantage point, you can see the fireplace in the family room and the large windows looking out into the backyard. To the left, there's a living room that leads towards sliding glass doors. The fact that the blood begins here and not in the bedroom where she was purportedly taken raises a massive red flag. If she was attacked in her sleep, why is the foyer the first place we see her blood? Forensic experts will tell you that it takes time for blood to accumulate and begin to drip, but the location of these drops suggests a specific sequence of events that doesn't necessarily involve a chaotic struggle through the house. Instead, it suggests a controlled, albeit violent movement toward the exit. I reached out to Dr. Peter Valentine, a heavyweight in the world of forensic science and bloodstain pattern analysis, to help make sense of this. Dr. Valentine isn't just an academic, he's a former Connecticut State Police detective who has testified in federal courts. He looked at the data and the imagery we have, mostly captured by journalists like Brian Enton and Michael Ruiz after the scene was prematurely released, and his analysis is chilling. He identifies these marks as drip stains. In the world of forensics, a drip stain is the simplest form of blood evidence. Gravity pulling liquid down from a stationary or slow-moving source. There's no energy behind them, no high-velocity spray from a gunshot, no cast-off from a swinging blunt object, just the steady, rhythmic fall of blood onto a surface. What's fascinating is that these stains are almost perfectly circular. For a blood drop to be a perfect circle, the source has to be directly above the point of impact. If a person is running or moving quickly, the drops hit the floor at an angle, creating elongated tails that point in the direction of travel. But Nancy's blood didn't have tails. It fell straight down. This tells us that whoever was bleeding, and the sheriff has confirmed it was Nancy, was moving at a snail's pace or was being held stationary at multiple points along the path, inside the front door, then just outside the threshold, and then further down the walkway. Dr. Valentine calls this a not insignificant amount of time. It implies a struggle of a different kind, not a fight for life, perhaps, but a struggle of logistics. Was the perpetrator grappling with a heavy door? Was he trying to shift his grip on a resisting woman? The more we look at the physics of these droplets, the more the kidnapping narrative starts to feel like a heavy, slow-motion nightmare. There is one specific spot on the walkway that has caused a lot of debate among observers. It doesn't look like the other neat circular drops. It's a bit more chaotic, a bit more misty. Many have speculated that this is an expiration pattern, essentially blood being coughed or breathed out from the lungs or airway. If true, that would indicate a much more severe internal injury. However, Dr. Valentine offers a different, perhaps more clinical explanation: satellite spatter. When a drop of blood falls into a pool of blood that has already accumulated on the ground, it creates a tiny splash. These satellites can look like a spray or a cough to the untrained eye, but they actually confirm that the source was standing in that exact spot long enough for a small pool to form. This brings us to the vehicle. The trail of blood doesn't just wander off into the desert, it stops abruptly. In the world of investigative logic, an abrupt stop in a blood trail usually means one of two things. The bleeding was stopped by a bandage, a hand, or a change in position, or the victim was placed into a vehicle. Given where the trail ends, near the driveway, the vehicle theory is the most likely. But here is the kicker. If Nancy was bleeding heavily enough to leave a pool at the front door and a trail down the walk, that vehicle is a forensic goldmine. Even if a killer scrubs a car until it looks brand new, blood is incredibly difficult to truly erase. It seeps into floor mats, cracks in the upholstery, and seatbelt mechanisms. Investigators use latent development reagents, chemicals that glow or change color when they hit even microscopic traces of hemoglobin. The problem? We don't have the vehicle. And the reason we might never find it could go back to those first few hours of the investigation. The hours Sheriff Nanos now says he has no regrets about. While the sheriff is busy defending his team's performance in recent interviews with local Tucson stations, the community is looking at the timeline with a much more cynical eye. The crime scene was released just 30 hours after Nancy disappeared. By the time national reporters were on the ground, they were able to walk right up to the front door and film the blood themselves because the yellow tape was already gone. It's a move that many, including Dr. Valentine, find baffling. In a case where forensic evidence is the only thing you have, why would you give up the primary source of that evidence before the sun has even set twice? The controversy surrounding Sheriff Chris Nanos has reached a boiling point, and it's not just coming from frustrated true crime followers on the internet, it's coming from inside the house. During a recent Pima County Board of Supervisors meeting, the atmosphere wasn't just tense, it was mutinous. We saw Sergeant Aaron Cross, the president of the Pima County Deputies Organization, stand before the board and deliver a scathing indictment of his own boss. This isn't a small disagreement over paperwork. This is the largest union of deputies in the county officially declaring no confidence in their leader. When the people wearing the badges tell you they don't trust the man at the top, the community starts to look at every unforced error in the Nancy Guthrie case through a much darker lens. Sergeant Cross didn't hold back. He brought up a long-hidden record from Nanos's past, allegations from his time as an officer in El Paso involving the physical abuse of a handcuffed suspect. These are the kinds of details that usually get scrubbed during a background check for a high-level peace officer, yet they've remained buried for 40 years. The deputies are calling it a fraud. They are calling for his resignation. And while this political firestorm rages, the Nancy Guthrie investigation feels like it's been caught in the crossfire. Is the department focused focused on finding Nancy, or is it focused on damage control? When you have a sheriff who goes on television to say he has no regrets about releasing a crime scene after only 30 hours, you have to wonder if the Monday morning quarterbacking he dismisses is actually the sound of a community demanding basic competence. The sheriff's recent comments to News 4 Tucson are particularly jarring. He's shifted his tone. He's now making direct appeals to the kidnapper, saying things like, just give her up, take her to a clinic, a hospital, drop her off. To a seasoned investigator, that sounds less like a high-stakes manhunt and more like a desperate plea. Compare that to the language used by Savannah Guthrie, who has begun talking about a place of final rest. There is a massive disconnect here. One side is preparing for a funeral, while the other is suggesting that an 84-year-old woman who has been missing for over 50 days and left a trail of blood in her wake might just be sitting in a room somewhere waiting to be dropped off. It feels detached from the brutal reality of the forensic evidence we've been discussing. Let's talk about that brutal reality for a moment. If we look at the blood inside the home, as my sources have described, we have to ask, how did it get there? Dr. Valentine pointed out something that many of us missed. He noted that in the journalist photos, some of the droplets outside looked skeletonized. This is a forensic term for a blood drop that started to dry around the edges before being disturbed. If a drop is skeletonized, it means something. A shoe, a dragging hem of a garment, or a hand interrupted the drying process. But here's the catch. Blood in a climate like Tucson's February weather would dry in about 15 to 20 minutes. This means the disturbance didn't happen when the reporters showed up days later. It happened within 20 minutes of the blood hitting the floor. This points to a perpetrator who was still on the property, moving around the threshold, perhaps going back inside to grab something or ensuring the door was closed. It paints a picture of a killer who wasn't in a panicked rush. He was methodical. He was taking his time. And if he was taking his time, why did the investigators miss so much? Why was the Nest doorbell camera bracket left on the wall for 3 weeks before being seized? Why was the welcome mat, a porous surface that could hold DNA, fabric fibers from a vehicle, or soil from a suspect's yard, left sitting in the sun for nearly a month? Dr. Valentine calls these unforced errors. In a high-profile case involving a famous family, the pressure to produce results can lead to a rush to judgment, or ironically, a rush to clear the scene to avoid the optics of a long-term occupation. But in doing so, they might have literally walked over the evidence that could have ended this on day 2. Dr. Valentine's approach is different. He says you have to let the house talk to you. You have to look for the status quo and then find the one thing that doesn't fit. In Nancy's house, which was known to be meticulously kept, those disruptions should have been glaring. Instead, we're left with a sheriff who says he probably would have held the scene longer in hindsight, but in the next breath says he has no regrets. This is the point where the technical details of the case meet the human cost. We are talking about an 84-year-old woman. Think about your own mother or grandmother. Think about the frailty of skin at that age. How a simple grab of the arm can cause deep bruising or even a tear. At 84, especially if someone is on blood thinners, they don't just bleed, they bruise, they weep, and they lose a sense of security that takes a lifetime to build. For Nancy Guthrie to be taken from the one place she felt safe, her home, is a violation that resonates with every family in America. It's the ultimate nightmare. The phone call in the middle of the night, the empty bed, the unexplained silence. The emotional anchor of this story isn't just the what or the how, it's the who. It's the community members who showed up at the Board of Supervisors meeting, not just to vent about politics, but to demand justice for a woman they considered one of their own. There's a palpable sense of vulnerability in Pima County right now. If a woman with Nancy's resources and high-profile family can simply vanish from her foyer, what hope is there for anyone else? The pain of the Guthrie family is being broadcast on a national stage, but the community pain is quiet, simmering, and increasingly angry. They see the blood on the walkway every time they turn on the news, and they see a sheriff who seems more interested in his legacy than the evidence. When Dr. Valentine talks about the not insignificant amount of time the perpetrator spent at that front door, he's talking about a moment of pure terror. Whether Nancy was alive and being held, or whether she had already succumbed to her injuries and was being moved, that threshold represents the last point of contact between a mother and her home. The fact that the blood pattern is identical inside and out tells us that the transition from victim in her home to missing person happened right there. under the porch light. It wasn't a hidden crime in a back room. It was a bold, slow-motion abduction that left a permanent stain on the community's heart. As we look toward day 53 and beyond, we have to reconcile the two versions of this investigation. There is the official story provided by Sheriff Nanos, a story of a team doing their best, a few minor Monday morning quarterback regrets, and a hopeful plea for a safe return. Then there is the forensic story being pieced together by experts like Dr. Valentin and sources close to the evidence. The forensic story tells us about vertical drips, slow movements, pools of blood forming at the exit, and a perimeter that was surrendered far too soon. The forensic story suggests that Nancy was likely at the threshold for a minute or more. It suggests that the perpetrator likely has her blood on the back of his clothing, a detail he might not even realize. It suggests that a vehicle was parked exactly where the trail ends. These aren't guesses. They are the logical conclusions drawn from the physics of the scene. If the sheriff's department isn't following these leads with the same intensity that they're defending their reputation, then the no confidence vote from the deputies isn't just a political move. It's a warning. The investigation into Nancy Guthrie isn't just about one missing woman anymore. It's about the integrity of the system we trust to protect us. It's about whether famous families get better treatment or if the glare of the spotlight actually causes the gears of justice to grind to a halt. As we wait for the results of the latent evidence testing, the stuff they finally went back to get under that white tent weeks later, the clock is ticking. Every day that passes is a day the scumbag gets further away, and every day the blood on that walkway fades a little more. But we won't let it fade. We're going to keep looking at those drops, and we're going to keep asking why the door was wide open. The silence coming from the Pima County Sheriff's Department regarding the specific coordinates of the blood inside the home is perhaps the loudest part of this investigation. When my source confirmed that the dripping begins in the front entrance, it essentially dismantled the theory of a chaotic, high-speed abduction. If Nancy was taken from her bed, as the family believes, she traveled from that bedroom through the house and to the front door without leaving a single trace of biological evidence until she hit that foyer. Think about the physics of that for a second. That implies she was either uninjured during the initial contact in the bedroom, or her injuries were managed, perhaps wrapped or suppressed, until she reached the exit. Dr. Valentin's insight into the latent nature of blood is the key here. If she was bleeding in the bedroom, even if the perpetrator cleaned it up, the color red might be gone, but the chemical signature remains. Yet the focus of the secondary investigation, the one that happened under that mysterious white tent weeks later, seemed fixated on the front porch. Why? If the blood starts in the hallway, flows over the threshold, and stops at the driveway, the front door is the transition point. It is the choke point of the entire crime. It's where the perpetrator had to juggle Nancy, the door, his own balance, and potentially a weapon or a light. This is likely why the satellite spatter exists there. He stopped. He struggled with the lock or the heavy door handle, and in those 30 to 60 seconds, the blood pooled and splashed. But there's a darker possibility that investigators have to consider, even if it's uncomfortable. If the blood pattern is identical inside and out, clean, vertical drops, it suggests the source was being held in a way that allowed for a clear, unobstructed path to the floor. If you are dragging someone, the blood smears. If you are carrying someone in a fireman's carry over your shoulder, the blood might hit your own back or legs before it hits the ground, creating angled or interrupted drops. But these are perfect circles. This suggests Nancy was likely upright, perhaps supported under the arms, moving at a shuffle. It's a haunting image, an 84-year-old woman, injured and bleeding, being forced to walk out of her own front door in the dead of night. We have to talk about the nest cam factor. For 3 weeks, a bracket sat on Nancy's doorframe, a skeleton of the security system that was supposed to protect her. The perpetrator didn't just bypass the camera, he took it. This shows a level of forensic awareness that goes beyond a common burglar. He knew that the footage lived on that device or that the physical removal of the unit would buy him time. But here's what he might have missed: his hands. If he reached up to rip that camera down, he was touching a stationary, textured surface. Even with gloves, there is the potential for touch DNA or fibers from the glove material to snag on the metal bracket. The fact that the sheriff's department didn't seize that bracket on day one is, quite frankly, inexcusable to many forensic professionals. When you have blood droplets right below a piece of evidence, you take the evidence. You don't leave it to weather in the Arizona sun for 21 days. Every day that bracket sat there, the heat and UV rays were degrading potential DNA. When the investigators finally put that tent up in week 3, it felt like a realization moment. A sudden, oh, we should probably check that came far too late. It's these types of delays that lead to the stalled feeling of the case. And then there's the welcome mat. Dr. Valentine mentioned it's a treasure trove of trace evidence. In many famous American cases, like the John Benet Ramsey or the Van Dam investigations, the smallest fibers found on a rug or a mat were the smoking gun that tied a suspect to a location. Nancy's mat would have captured the mud from his home or the carpet fibers from his vehicle. By leaving it there, the department allowed the scene to be contaminated by wind, dust, and even the journalists who were eventually allowed to walk right up to the door. It's a chain of custody nightmare that any defense attorney would have a field day with if a suspect is ever brought to trial. The political fallout for Sheriff Nanos is only beginning. When a union takes a no-confidence vote, they aren't just complaining about their boss. They are signaling to the public that the internal machinery of the department is broken. Sergeant Cross mentioned Nanos' past in El Paso, but he also alluded to a fraud regarding how the sheriff has presented his record to the voters. This goes to the heart of credibility. If a sheriff isn't transparent about his own history, how can the public trust him to be transparent about the most high-profile disappearance in Pima County history? The recall effort mentioned in the Board of Supervisors meeting is a direct result of this vacuum of trust. People are tired of the cherry-picked interviews and the lack of formal press conferences. For the first few weeks, the updates were daily. Now we get sporadic defensive sound bites. This information blackout often happens when an investigation is truly stumped, but in this case, it feels like the department is shielding itself from the criticism of its own early mistakes. The Monday morning quarterback defense only works if the game was played correctly in the first place, but when you lose the ball, in this case the primary crime scene, within 30 hours, the criticism isn't just hindsight, it's a valid critique of a failed strategy. Meanwhile, the Guthrie family is left in a state of agonizing limbo. Savannah Guthrie's shift in language toward final rest is a heartbreaking indicator of where the family's hope currently resides. They are no longer looking for a miracle. They are looking for a resolution. They want to bring her home, even if home means a cemetery. To hear the sheriff counter that with a plea for the kidnapper to drop her off at a clinic feels almost insulting to the reality of the situation. It's a clash between a family's grief-stricken realism and an official's desperate optimism, and the gap between the two is where the community's anger is festering. Let's look at the survivability of Nancy's injuries. Dr. Valentine mentioned that while the blood evidence is significant, it doesn't necessarily indicate a catastrophic or non-survivable event on its own. We've seen cases where people lose a pint of blood and survive, but we have to factor in the 84-year-old variable. A loss of blood that a 30-year-old could walk away from is a medical emergency for an octogenarian. If she was on blood thinners, as many her age are, the bleeding wouldn't stop easily, it would seep through clothing, it would pool quickly, and it would cause a rapid drop in blood pressure and cognitive function. This brings us to the vehicle theory once again. If the blood trail stops because she was put in a car, she was bleeding inside that car. The perpetrator would have had to deal with a significant amount of biological material on his seats, his floorboards, and potentially his own person. Unless he had the car prepped with plastic, which would indicate a level of premeditation that is even more terrifying, he was leaving a forensic trail that is nearly impossible to fully clean. Dr. Valentine noted that people only clean until the color red is gone. They don't clean the hemoglobin that is trapped in the foam of the seat or the cracks of the plastic trim. The search for the vehicle is likely where the federal assistance the sheriff mentioned is being focused. They are looking at plate readers, traffic cams, and private security footage from all over Tucson. They are looking for a car that was detailed on February 2nd or a vehicle that suddenly disappeared from a driveway. But the longer it takes to find that car, the more time the perpetrator has to dispose of it, either by fire, water, or a chop shop. Every day that passes without a vehicle being identified is a win for the scumbag who took Nancy, and a devastating blow to the hope of finding her.
The dynamic between the internal blood and the external trail tells us a story of a perpetrator who was likely struggling with more than just a victim. He was struggling with the environment. If you look at the floor plan of that house, coming from the master bedroom to the front door requires navigating a hallway and a foyer area. My sources are adamant the visible blood starts in that entrance hallway. This implies one of two things. Either Nancy was not bleeding until she reached that point, perhaps a second assault occurred as he tried to get her out the door, or she was being carried in a way that kept the blood from hitting the floor until he shifted his weight to open the door. This weight shift theory is something investigators have to look at closely. If you are carrying a person who is bleeding from the head or upper body and you stop to reach for a doorknob, your body posture changes. You might tilt the victim's head down or away from your shoulder. That is exactly when gravity takes over and a drip stain is created. The fact that we see multiple drops in the same spot, the pool pattern Dr. Valentin described, means he didn't just walk through the door. He was stuck there. He was either fumbling with a key, a latch, or a heavy spring-loaded door that wanted to push back against him. It's in these seconds of struggle that the most valuable evidence is usually left behind. If he was frustrated, if he was exerting himself, he was breathing hard, he was potentially sweating, he was losing hair or skin cells. If he was wearing a mask or a hoodie, the fibers from those garments would be floating in that foyer air, settling into the carpet or onto the threshold. By releasing the scene so early, the sheriff's department didn't just lose the blood, they lost the micro evidence that hadn't even been discovered yet. They effectively sterilized the crime scene for the perpetrator by allowing the family and the media to move in and override the killer's invisible footprint with their own. There is a final, haunting detail in the forensic analysis that we haven't fully explored: the height of the drops. Dr. Valentin explained the concept of terminal velocity, how blood hitting the floor from 3 feet up looks the same as blood hitting from 6 feet up, but the asterisk size asterisk and the asterisk scalloping asterisk of the edges can tell us about the surface itself. Nancy's front entrance has ceramic tiles. These are non-porous. Blood sits on top of them like a bead of water on a waxed car. Outside, on the concrete walkway, it's a different story. The concrete is porous. It sucks the moisture out of the blood, changing its color and its drying curve. If an investigator were to compare the drying state of the blood inside versus outside, they could determine if there was a time gap between the two. Did he leave the house, put her down, and then go back in? Or was it one continuous motion? My sources suggest the pattern is so consistent that it looks like a single slow motion leak. This points to a victim who was essentially a passive source of blood. She wasn't thrashing, she wasn't kicking, she was likely incapacitated either by a blow to the head or by the sheer shock of the abduction. This brings us back to the sheriff's no regrets stance. When you have this much forensic nuance, this many ifs and could be's, the last thing you do is walk away from the site of the crime. You stay until every tile has been lifted, you stay until the walls have been luminol tested, you stay until you have a suspect. To walk away after 30 hours and then come back 3 weeks later to put up a tent is the definition of too little too late. It's an admission that the initial sweep was superficial. And in a case where an 84-year-old woman's life is on the line, superficiality is a betrayal of the badge. As we close the book on day 52, the image that remains is that of the open back door and the blood-stained front threshold. It's a house with 2 stories, one of a routine entry through the garage and another of a violent slow-motion exit through the front. The Guthrie family continues to wait, their grief now hardened into a demand for answers that the current leadership in Pima County seems unable or unwilling to provide. The no confidence vote by the deputies isn't just a political headline, it's a reflection of the systemic failure that has allowed this case to go cold despite a trail of blood leading right to the driveway. We have learned today that the blood doesn't start on the porch, it starts inside the sanctuary of the home. We've learned that the spray people saw was likely a pool of blood being hit by more blood, proving the perpetrator stood there lingering while Nancy bled. And we've learned that the people tasked with solving this are currently fighting for their own political survival. The truth is out there, hidden in the fibers of a welcome mat or the latent stains in a car we haven't found yet. But until someone takes responsibility for the errors made in those first 30 hours, Nancy Guthrie remains a ghost in her own story. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into the evidence. This case is far from over, and as more information leaks from the department and from my sources, I will be here to break it down for you. If you found this analysis helpful, please share this video. The more eyes we have on this evidence, the harder it is for the authorities to look away. Like the video to help us reach more people, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the February report so you never miss an update on the Nancy Guthrie investigation. We are going to stay on this until the truth is finally brought to light. I am February. This is the February report. Thank you for watching.